You did not tell many people. Maybe you told one or two. You went back to work the next day or the day after. Someone asked how your weekend was, and you said fine, because the alternative, saying what actually happened, saying what you were actually carrying, felt like too much to explain, like it would require a defense, like you would have to justify the size of what you felt before they would give you permission to feel it. Nobody sent flowers, nobody brought food, nobody said take all the time you need. You lost your dog, or your cat, or the animal that had slept beside you, greeted you, needed you, known you every single day for 10, 12, 15 years. And the world, in its well-meaning way, did not know what to do with that. So you carried it alone. And in the carrying of it alone, something made the grief worse than it already was. A layer of pain on top of the pain. The feeling not just of loss, but of loss that nobody recognized as real. Psychology has a name for what happened to you, and understanding it may be the first step toward giving yourself what the world did not. In 1989, sociologist Kenneth Doka introduced a concept that gave language to something millions of people had experienced without being able to name: disenfranchised grief. Doka defined it as grief that occurs when a loss is not openly acknowledged, publicly mourned, or socially supported. The bereaved person experiences genuine, profound grief, but the social structures that normally support grieving are absent, because the loss itself is not recognized by society as worthy of them. The classic examples are losses that fall outside conventional categories of mourning: the loss of an ex-partner, the loss of a pregnancy early in gestation, the loss of a relationship that was secret, the loss of someone with whom your connection was complicated or unrecognized, and the loss of a pet. Pet loss sits squarely in the territory of disenfranchised grief. There is no funeral, there is no bereavement leave, in most countries, in most workplaces. There are no social rituals, no cultural scripts, no community gathering to hold the bereaved and say, "This was real, this mattered, we acknowledge your loss." Instead, there is often the opposite. There is minimization. "It was just a dog." There is redirection. "You can always get another one." There is impatience. "How long are you going to be upset about this?" And each of these responses, however well-intentioned, does the same thing. They tell the bereaved person that their grief is disproportionate, that they should be over this by now, that what they lost was not the kind of thing that warrants the grief they feel. The research is unambiguous about what this does. Disenfranchised grief is harder to process than recognized grief. It takes longer. It produces higher rates of complicated grief, depression, and prolonged bereavement. The grief itself is painful. The disenfranchisement of it makes it worse. Before we can understand why pet loss feels the way it feels, we need to understand what the bond with a pet actually is. Neurologically, biologically, rather than what the culture has decided it should be. The bond between a human and a long-term pet activates the same neural circuitry as the bond between a human and another human family member. The same oxytocin system, the same dopamine reward pathways, the same attachment circuitry identified by Bowlby and mapped in the decades since. When a person loses a pet, the brain does not experience the loss as the loss of a pet, a category it has decided is less important. It experiences the loss of an attachment figure, a being whose presence was woven into the daily architecture of the person's life, whose absence now creates a structural void in every routine, every room, every waking hour. The morning routine that included feeding, now absent. The walk that was daily, now absent. And the weight of the animal on the bed at night, now absent. The greeting at the door, now absent. Each of these absences is its own small loss. And together, they constitute something that neuroscience researcher Mary Frances O'Connor, who studies the grieving brain, describes as the process of the brain updating its model of the world. The brain, she argues, has a prediction system. It predicts the presence of the loved one in the morning, at the door, on the bed. And when those predictions repeatedly fail, the brain must update itself. That updating is grief, and it is painful because the prediction system was built through years of actual experience. The longer the bond, the deeper the predictions, the more updating the brain must do. A 15-year bond requires 15 years of predictions to be revised. No wonder it takes the time it takes. This is the part that people feel most guilty about. The part they whisper, if they say it at all. I think losing my dog hurt more than losing my grandmother, more than losing my colleague, more than some human losses I have lived through. They say it with shame, as if it reveals something wrong with them, as if the admission is a confession of disordered priorities. It is not. It is a neurologically predictable consequence of the particular quality of the pet bond, a quality that most human relationships, however loving, do not share. Ambivalence. All human relationships contain ambivalence. The closest human bonds, parent and child, long-term partners, siblings, contain the most ambivalence, as years of accumulated conflict, disappointments, moments of distance. The history of every relationship is also the history of its failures, its tensions, its unresolved wounds. Even in the most loving human bonds, there are layers of complexity. Things unsaid, things regretted. The grief for a human is always, also, the grief for the relationship as it could have been and was not. The bond with a pet does not contain this. A well-loved pet offers something that no human relationship, in its full complexity, can sustain indefinitely. Unconditional, uncomplicated, consistent positive regard. The animal does not judge, does not remember last Tuesday's argument, does not withhold love in response to failure, does not require the management of its feelings alongside the management of your own. It simply loves you, every day, in the same way, without conditions. And when that ends, when the source of the only unconditional relationship most adults have ever experienced is removed, the grief is not just the grief of absence. It is the grief of the loss of unconditional love itself, which most people have experienced from no other source. This is why the grief can be total in a way that surprises even the person experiencing it. They are not just grieving an animal, they are grieving the purest form of attachment they had. Pet loss. Grief is rarely a single grief. It arrives in layers, each layer its own wound. There is the grief of the loss itself, the animal, the bond, the presence that is no longer there. As there is the grief of the decision, because so many pet deaths require the owner to make the choice. The veterinarian's words, the consent form, the particular weight of having chosen the moment of ending for a creature that trusted you completely. This grief has no equivalent in human loss. The guilt of it, rational or not, can last years. There is the grief of the routine, every habit dismantled at once, the food bowl still in its place, the lead by the door one night, the space then goes cold. The body returning home and bracing automatically for the greeting that does not come. There is the grief of the witness, the animal that knew you through a particular period of your life, that was present for your divorce, your illness, your loneliness, your recovery, is the animal that witnessed you during years you might otherwise have no witness for. Its death takes with it the only other living record of that time. And underneath all of it, the grief of not being allowed to grieve, the disenfranchisement, the returning to work, the "it was just a dog," the alone carrying of something that deserves to be carried by more than one person. Each of these layers presses down on the others. This is why pet loss can feel like drowning in something that the world insists is shallow water. If you have lost a pet, or when you do, there are things you deserve to know. Your grief is real, not metaphorically real, not real in a lesser sense that requires qualification. Neurologically, physiologically, psychologically real. The same systems, the same circuitry, as the same brain processes as the grief for a human. The culture's failure to recognize this is a failure of the culture. It is not information about the appropriate size of your grief. You are allowed to take time. The workplace and the calendar and the impatient world do not set the timeline for grief. The brain sets the timeline for grief, and the brain cannot be rushed. Attempts to rush it produce complicated grief, prolonged bereavement, and suppressed emotion that surfaces later in forms that are harder to identify and address. You are allowed to grieve specifically. The food bowl, the load, the particular way the animal slept, the specific greeting. Each specific loss is a real loss and deserves to be grieved in its specificity, not dissolved into a general sadness that cannot be examined. You are allowed to find support. A pet bereavement counseling exists and is effective. Pet loss support groups, in person and online, provide the social recognition that the broader culture withholds. Being in a space where others understand the size of what you lost without requiring you to defend it is not an indulgence. It is what grief support is supposed to do. And this, if someone tells you that you should be over it by now, or that it was just an animal, or that you can always get another one, they are not giving you information about your grief. They are giving you information about their own discomfort with loss, and their own unfamiliarity with what a bond between a human and an animal actually is. You know what it was. You lived inside it for 15 years. There is a particular kind of love that asks nothing of you, as that does not keep score, does not remember your failures, does not need you to be more than you are on any given day. Most people experience this love from one source for a limited number of years. And most people do not realize how rare it is until it is gone. You are not grieving an animal. You are grieving the loss of unconditional love. And there is no grief more deserving of acknowledgement than that. Give yourself what the world did not.